Yeah. There will be a link that we'll tweet. We usually tweet to get, so you can get access to it. Or is it?
What if I don't tweet?
Oliver, do you remember if the link to the broadcast is in the YouTube channel? When we're live broadcasting, it is, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So if you go to the YouTube channel for AZ PowerShell, you should be able to go to the live broadcast when we're broadcasting.
Give me a second. I am getting echoing. Okay. Say that again, Tom. I'm sorry.
Can you hear me? Is that better?
Yeah, I could hear you. I had the YouTube video playing in behind, so it was very confusing. I was hearing you asking me the same question over and over and over. Whew. Okay.
Oh, okay. Well, it was all between your ears then.
Yeah, exactly.
No, we work for multi-group, multi-homes.
What was the question? I couldn't glean that from all the confusion.
Oh, when we do the live broadcast, it should be on the YouTube channel, right?
Yes.
You can get to it. You
Yes.
shouldn't have to just depend on the tweet.
Right, just go to the YouTube channel. It's the video that's playing at the time.
Okay. That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, I'm actually searching Twitter to make sure that it's supposed to auto post when I put it into PowerShell, into the YouTube channel. Yes, it did. So about a minute ago, it presented, as I started live broadcasting, it presented the tweet saying, "Hey, come see us."
Okay.
Okay, so you are now broadcasting. Blah, blah.
Oh, we are?
Yeah, use proper English. Blah.
We're live and in charge?
Hmm?
Nick? Okay. Sure. Okay, I guess we're ready to get started. Welcome everybody to this month's installment of Arizona PowerShell Users Group for August. Today, we're pleased to bring you Robb Scheiefer from, I can't remember what state you're from, Rob. Are you from Alabama or Mississippi or what?
Alabama.
Okay. So before I turn it over to Rob, I'd like to give a few minutes to our sponsors who have been kind enough to provide us the venue and something yummy to eat tonight. The video is right there. You see it right there?
Stand right here.
Yeah, you can stand behind all the crew. There you go.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of familiar faces in here. I'm Nick. That's my partner in Madison. So we're at Tech Systems. We have 100 offices across the nation. We see job openings every day. Like there are 6 open positions for every 1 IT professional. So there are a lot of open jobs out there. I don't want to waste your time like talking about these jobs. We'd much rather get offline. We'll get together, we'll grab coffee, we'll grab a bite to eat. We do food really well. And just kind of really figure out what you guys are looking for, what your skills are, what you're interested in, and then that way when I see that position, I'll give you a call directly like, hey, take a look at this and everything. So love PowerShell, love this group. I'll get out of your hair and let you guys get to it over here. So, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Rob, can you see everybody in the room but me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. So I'm right beside the machine. I figured you'd rather see the participants than just scary old me. So with that, I guess we'll turn the floor over to Rob so he can begin the session on Chef and PowerShell. So take it away, Rob.
All right, I'm going to try to share my screen here. Let me know when you can see the title slide here.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, great. So this is actually a talk that I gave at the PowerShell Summit back in April of this year. And it's really well received. And so I started to ask around to see if any user groups wanted to hear about test-driven development with Chef, DSC, and Pester, and had some good response there. And Tom was kind enough to invite me to come speak to you all. So I appreciate the opportunity and look forward to learn about what y'all do and hopefully share some knowledge about what we've done here with Chef and DSC and Pester. Oliver, are you still on the line?
Yes, sir, I am. I can hear the echo. Do you want me to switch them off?
Yeah, if you don't mind, just mute it because I'm sure I'll step all over myself if I hear myself multiple times like that.
Okay, they are now muted. Sorry, guys.
Tom, if you would, maybe put some questions in the chat there, and then periodically I'll go and look for those, and then maybe at the end we'll open up the audio again so we can ask questions. Does that sound okay?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. So just a little bit about me. My name is Robb Scheiefer, like Tom said. My Twitter handle is Chief7. I was recently awarded a Microsoft MVP in the Visual Studio and Dev Technology category. I blog pretty frequently over at .netcatch.com, and I am the co-founder of the Birmingham.net meetup in Birmingham, Alabama. Professionally, I work for a company called EBSCO Industries. You might have heard of EBSCO if you've gone to university anytime recently. We work with a lot of the universities across the world to help them purchase, acquire, and provide library content to their patrons. We have a product called EBSCO Host. That's what most people have heard about. But we're in various aspects of the information sales and services industry. I've personally been with EBSCO about 10 years, and we have about 500 to 600 developers all told in our division. I specifically work in a group of internal business systems, and we have about 100 plus applications and services that we manage. I've been a solution architect there for about 3 years, and the thing probably I'm most proud of is building up a pretty mature continuous delivery process where we went from basically quarterly deployments of our primary applications to now today we are deploying something to production every 9 hours. So pretty different there. A lot of automation and a lot of culture and process change that we've enacted to support that. But Chef is actually one of the components that's part of that as far as infrastructure configuration, and so that's what we're going to talk about today. So why use Chef? What is it? What does it do? So if you're not familiar, Chef is an infrastructure configuration tool, and as opposed to doing manual server configurations, which is what most shops are probably doing, that's a slow, error-prone, inconsistent process. Chef provides a way to automate that with code. And that gives you a lot faster speed. It gives you more consistency, repeatability. It allows you to automate everything and schedule things that you need. And then specifically for this talk, we're going to talk about test-driven development in the context of Chef and infrastructure configuration. And really, we're looking at that because you get all the same benefits that you do when you're looking at it from a developer standpoint. It allows you to increase velocity and produce better designs. So just a little bit of intro to Chef. It's based on Ruby. It's been around since 2007, I think. I'm not sure the actual release date, but Chef, the company, has been around since 2007. And it provides several benefits, primarily automation and repeatable server configuration. It allows us to avoid configuration drift of our servers. Allows us to version that configuration, and it's a testable platform. So some of the major components of Chef include the Chef server, Chef client, cookbooks, and recipes. You kind of see that visually there on the right. We're going to dig into each one of those sections. So first you have the Chef DK. That's kind of the install that you would use to create a development environment. So on your local workstation, you would install what they call the Chef DK. It's a single executable and install several components on your local machine. And it's really everything that you need to get started in building Chef and Chef cookbooks. So as you might have seen before, or maybe just via some of this information so far, Chef really plays off of the Chef word and has tools and techniques and code that is named after various chef-related or kitchen or food-related items. So Food Critic, for example, is a static analysis tool. It allows us to analyze our Chef code for syntax issues. Kitchen is a testing platform, and that's one of the things we're going to look at more closely today. Chef Spec is a unit testing framework. Inspect is more of an integration or policy testing framework. Recipes and cookbooks are the actual things that we build with Chef. A cookbook is the kind of the versionable component that we build, and within that cookbook you have multiple recipes that you can use. So those are all components of the workstation environment that you would use when you're building Chef cookbooks. And then Chef Server is a centralized component that you can use to manage your nodes and your Chef cookbooks and things, and it provides several features. You can upload all of your cookbooks there. It can provide as a data store to store various additional information about your configuration. It allows you to search nodes and cookbooks and the history of when Chef is run across those different nodes. It provides high availability. An API, the supermarket is where we can share our cookbooks with other developers or operations folks. The run list is the list of cookbooks that we would want to run on a given node. And then you can also set up various policies as well. And then finally, we have the different Chef clients, the different nodes that we would actually run Chef on. And that node would call out to the Chef server if you bootstrap it that way to get various information, to get the cookbooks that it needs and log everything that's happening in the context of Chef. So that's a little bit about Chef, but Chef on Windows can be a little bit complex if you're not familiar with it. So Chef was originally built for Linux, but a few years back, probably 2014 or so, they started adding more Windows support, but that was very kind of slow moving. And as they were starting to develop some Windows resources and cookbooks, Microsoft and the PowerShell team came up with PowerShell DSC that provides some similar functionality. But once that was released, Chef identified that, hey, that's an easy way that we can start to leverage some of the great PowerShell and DSC components that are out there. We can pull those into Chef. So Chef added support for DSC so that you can run DSC resources inside of Chef, which is one of the things we'll look at as well today. And then a little bit further, Chef Server benefits, has reporting. You can manage all your roles and environments. It has a web administration UI. Then you can also have attributes, which is the data store that we talked about. So one thing I will mention, a lot of people ask when I give this talk, why is it that, why would we use Chef if we already have or use DSC? And it's really because of these Chef server benefits. Chef's been around longer. It's got more enterprise features. These are things that DSC just doesn't have, but we can still leverage all of the benefits of DSC in the context of Chef. And so that's a little bit of what we'll show today. So I'll pause right there for a minute. Any questions so far?
Nothing other than the refresh rates are really bad.
Oh no. I'll try to move ahead and leave plenty of time for you to see it. So we'll go ahead and jump into some of the demo here. So we'll take a look at a Chef cookbook here. So I'm showing Visual Studio Code now. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is a typical Chef repository where you have a folder of cookbooks, and you can have one or more cookbooks in that repository. This Acme Win Web is a custom cookbook that I've created, which we're going to dig into. These others are just references and dependencies that our cookbook has, and I've just downloaded those locally, and they all look fairly similar, but we're going to dig into this one here. So once you've downloaded the Chef DK, it adds a CLI that you can use to start to interact with Chef and build different components. And one of those is a command to create a cookbook, and it's really just a template, and this is basically what it gives you, these folders and files and things. And when you first create your first cookbook, one of the things you'll want to look at is this metadata file. And so as you would expect, it has metadata about your cookbook. And so general information like the name of the cookbook, who maintains it, an email address, license description, the version of the cookbook, that's pretty important, and then any dependencies that you have. And so you can see here, I've got a dependency on the PowerShell Cookbook. And so my cookbook is going to actually go out to the supermarket, which is where Chef provides a public repository of publicly available cookbooks for others to use and depend upon. So I think Chef, the company, has created this PowerShell Cookbook, and I'm depending on that because in my Acme Win Web cookbook, I want to actually install PowerShell as part of this cookbook. So the name of this cookbook implies that this is a cookbook for a Windows web server, for example. And so we'll look at some of the things that we might want to configure on a Windows web server. So one of the other things I'll mention is this Burks file. So this is a reference to a framework or a product called Burkshelf, and it's a dependency management tool for Chef. And so here we're telling Burkshelf where it can go to get cookbooks that we depend on. So we're just referencing that public supermarket off the Chef website. And then we're also directing it to look at the metadata file to find any dependencies that we need. You can list dependencies here as well, but we list those on the metadata file instead. And in this case, we just have PowerShell. PowerShell in turn depends on multiple other cookbooks, which is why we have 5 or 6 of those in here. PowerShell depends on Windows. Windows depends on these others, for example. So that's the metadata file, the Burkshelf file. Let's look at some actual recipes. So this is the actual code that we would write. So by default, you get a recipe called default. And so we'll start to look at some of the code that's here. So as I mentioned before, Chef is written in Ruby. And so, I'm traditionally a C# developer, and, I was able to start to use this really without any problem. Ruby and C#, there's a lot of similarities, a lot of differences too, but in general, I've been able to transition over pretty easily. There's actually a really good blog post from Chef that gives you just enough Ruby to be able to write Chef Cookbook. So if you're interested in that, definitely worth looking at that. So at the top, we just have some general, cookbook name, comments, and things. Then we just have a log statement here to debug out, what version of Windows we're actually on. I'm creating a variable here for not Windows 10 based on some helpers. So these are some of the helpers that Chef provides for you to build your cookbooks. And then this is where we reference PowerShell. So in this case, I'm saying I want to include the PowerShell 5 recipe from the PowerShell Cookbook if it's not Windows 10. If it's Windows 10, PowerShell 5 is already installed, so I don't have to do that. So that's just an easy way that you can reference other cookbooks inside of your cookbook so that you don't have to write as much code, which is really nice. So here we get down to an actual resource that we've created here. And in this case, I'm instructing Chef to create a directory at the path of this variable, which is log folder and clogs. And then I'm just naming the resource here. So directory is a resource that Chef provides, and they have a whole list of resources that you can download and use within your Chef cookbooks. And so that's one type of resource. Another type of resource, like we talked about, is the DSC resource. And this is a resource that allows you to call out to DSC resources. So we'll scroll down here for a moment, and it'll give us an idea the differences or how it compares. So Chef provides a directory resource, but we can also utilize the DSC resource to call the file DSC resource. So in this case, these are both examples of creating directories. First, using the Chef resource here, the directory resource. And then down here, we're actually using the DSC file resource. And in this case, we have to tell it to type of directory. We give it a destination path, which is C data. But again, that's just another way to create a directory or a folder. So here I'm creating a logs folder at the top using the Chef resource. And then here at the bottom, we're creating the C data directory using the DSC resource. There's all other kinds of resources you can do. So in this case, this is a DSC resource that's just calling a PowerShell script. So it's kind of an ad hoc or on-the-fly DSC resource, if you will. Let's see what else. These are all the DSC resources. There's plenty of other resources, and we'll look at a few as we go along, but that's just kind of a quick overview of DSC resources and Chef and a Chef cookbook from a high level. Any questions so far? Okay. So now that we've learned a little bit about Chef, now let's talk about the testing side of Chef. So Chef Spec is the unit testing framework that Chef provides to run your unit tests. And so because Chef is really about applying configuration to a server or a computer node, it's somewhat different than you would expect if you're familiar with unit testing C# code, for example. And so they have to provide Chef Spec, which provides a sandbox in which you can run your Chef unit tests. And so what that means is the Chef client is not actually fully run. It's run in that sandbox, and then Chef Spec is evaluating how it's running to determine if it's meeting all of the assertions or the expectations that you have in your unit test. So Chef Spec provides syntax checking as well. It allows you to verify logic in your recipe. You can set up guards, which is another type of logic control. You can set expectations and validate properties as well. And by default, each unit test reevaluates the Chef Cookbook on each unit test. You can change that and cache that result. You may or may not want to do that depending on, if you believe there's sessionable state that can traverse across unit tests. And then again, we can use Berkshelf to fulfill any dependencies that we have. Let's look at that real quick. So in my spec folder is where I have my unit tests. And so we'll look at this default spec.rb file. So again, RB file is a Ruby file. Our tests are written here in Ruby. And I forgot to mention, but Chef Spec is actually built on top of rspec. rspec is a unit testing framework in Ruby. So this is our unit test. And so the first thing here is we'll rank a reference out to a spec helper file. And this is just where we can place any code that we might share across different unit tests. So here we're referencing Chef Spec and Chef Spec Berkshelf to pull in those dependencies so that we have all the helpers from Chef Spec in the sandbox, and then also the dependency management via Berkshelf.
Sorry, sir, we have a question. Shoot the question, Tom.
So Mike Eiler had a question for you. He's here in the room. And we have sorry about the echo. I have two microphones I just realized that are on. If I get a chance, I'll see if I can't mute one of the two microphones.
Okay, great.
So go ahead, Mike.
Can you go back to the default .rb file?
Sure. Yeah. There we go.
Scroll up a little bit. Okay, so line 9 and 10. Line 9, where you have an NT version.
Yes.
Is that OHI data or
Yes.
not?
Well, so it depends
Okay.
where you're running. So there's different sides of OHI. One is the testing aspect, and so in that case, it's all mocked. But then if you're actually running Chef in the context of the node, I think it's really just an abstraction on top of the Windows node itself, and it'll pull the actual NT version. Does that answer your question?
Kind of, yeah. I've always seen it, like everything I've seen in person or online, it always has like the hashtag, braces, node, NT version. Just never seen it like that. Is there a way to list out, like, can you use all of the OHI attributes like that, or only certain ones?
I'm not sure. We would have to look at this version helper to see what is publicly available on there. But I'm sure you can get to all the OHI data if you need it. But I've never had to do it, honestly.
So before you mute us, are you still getting the echo?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, good, because I moved the speaker a ways away from the microphone, so hopefully that'll minimize our echo.
Yeah. So that's perfect. So don't mute, and if you have any questions, just feel free to interrupt me.
Okay, cool.
Great.
Okay, one more question.
Certainly.
Yeah. Okay, line 22. You have hashtag cookbook _ name.
Yes.
I've been trying to figure out how to do that. There's really not much online how to do that, but does that hold this cookbook name?
Yes.
Into
So
the node?
yeah, so cookbook name is like a global variable in the context of the chef cookbook. So you can just reference it here and fill it in. Yep.
Awesome. Is there a way to find other values you can carry over?
I haven't seen any other ones. I think that's the only one that is globally available like that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, great question. All right, so over here in the unit test, we have the dependencies at the top. I'm actually pulling in one of the local libraries that I've created here as well. And then we actually get into the tests themselves. So I'm going to jump down here to this let statement. So this is where we actually run chef via chef spec. So you can see here we reference chef spec and we call the solo runner. We want to create a new solo runner and we tell it we want to use the Windows platform and a specific version. This version is a variable that we've defined in the loop up here at the top. What this means is I want to run all of my unit tests against both 2008 R2 and 10 within the context of chef spec. So that's all mock data. So technically it's not running against those versions, but it is going to pull all of that OHI data and use that in the context of chef. So that means we can leverage all of that and validate logic branches around, if this is Windows 10, you should do one thing. If it's not, you should do something else, for example. So we create that chef spec solo runner, and then we call converge. Converge is the step where it actually applies the chef cookbook to the node. And then it places that into the chef run variable. And then, so in this case, we actually have to specify the cookbook name. We do not get that. That's not a global variable in the context of the unit test. So we are going to leverage that. You'll see here below. So here again, because this is all built on top of rspec, it uses the rspec syntax for the unit test, which, if you're familiar with Pester, is actually somewhat similar. But it uses this describe, context, and it structure. And so describe and context is really more of an organization and sub-organization grouping, if you will, or blocks of code. And then within that, we actually have our individual unit tests. So this first unit test is we just expect that the chef run will not raise an error. So pretty easy there. And then we get to the unit test for creating our directory. So we say it, and then this is the name of our test, and then we say expect the chef run, which is the reference to the solo runner up here. We expect that to create a directory with the resource name of log folder and the properties path of C logs. So this is particularly interesting. This is what they call a resource matcher. And so directory is the resource, create is the action. This is the name of the resource, and then when you use the with attribute, you're specifying any properties that you have. So if we go back to our cookbook, you can see this is a directory resource, which is referenced here. It's the create action. Creates there. Log folder is the name of the resource, which is here. Whoops, here. And then we're specifying the path is this variable, which is C logs. C logs there. So similarly, we can do the same thing. I'll go down to this second one where we create the program directory. So same thing here. We expect the chef run to run a DSC resource named data folder with the resource set to file and the properties of C data and directory. Back to our cookbook, same thing. It's a DSC resource that we're running. We're going to run the file resource. The resource is named data folder. Destination path is C data, and the property is directory. So then we can start to get into more complex scenarios. So in this case, I've got some of this code commented out so that it doesn't have to have an internet connection, but I'll uncomment that for a second. So in this case, I've got some conditional logic where if it's Windows 10, I want to create, in this case, it's a file share in a certain way. If it's not Windows 10, I have to do it a different way. So this is where we get into what scripting is available to us on the Windows OS to perform whatever configuration we need. So in this case, creating a file share in Windows 10, that's really easy because I created some new commandlets in PowerShell, specifically get SMB share and set SMB share, I believe. And then further, someone's created a DSC resource to leverage those commandlets. And so here we're referencing that. And we're saying we want to use the XSMB DSC resource to run a DSC resource, and we want to set the name to logs, the path to log folder, which is a variable we've set here, and then we want to set read access and ensure that that is present. If it's not Windows 10, we have to do something else because those commandlets and that DSC resource won't work. And so in this case, we've got to fall back to some batch commands, specifically net share. And so in this case, I'm just running a PowerShell script to run the net share command with the appropriate attribute. So I have to provide a test script where I check to see if the logs file share is created. And if it's not, I create it here using this command. So I say net and then pass the args, and the args are create net share where logs is equal to the log folder, and then I grant the read access. So let's look at the cookbook side of that. I think that's here. So here, this is the actual resource where we're doing those same things. We looked at the unit test first. This is the actual cookbook. So if not Windows 10, we use the net share command. If it is Windows 10, we first install the XSMB share DSC resource from the gallery using the get DSC resource command or commandlet. And then we use and call that XSMB share and give it the name of the logs and all this other information. Make sense? So I don't think that's pretty well covers the unit test. So as far as being able to run those tests, we can run a command here to call into and pull that down to initiate chef spec. And we do that by using the chef exec command and tell it to run rspec. So part of what the chef DK provides to you is some embedded resources for Git and Ruby and a couple of gems, all kinds of stuff. So it has everything that we need to be able to start developing chef cookbooks. But to be able to run Ruby commands through chef spec, you have to use the chef exec command, and then we're running the rspec Ruby command. And like we said, because chef spec is built on top of rspec, that's the command what we use to execute these tests. So in this case, we have some output. We see that it finished in about 6 seconds, and it ran 10 examples, which are your unit tests, and we had 0 failures. There's some warnings up here about a command or resource that's out of date, but we can ignore that in this case. So just so you can see what it looks like when we have a failure, let's go in and change the name of this directory. So in this case, I've changed it to clogs2. That does not match what the cookbook is configured to create. So what we'll see here is that chef spec will run. It will apply our cookbook, our default recipe in our cookbook, against that chef spec sandbox environment and evaluate how it runs, and then run all of our unit tests based on that. So in this case, we can see that there was a failure here where it expected it to run with a clogs, but the path was clogs2. And you can see it's done it twice because we're running these tests in both or for both 2008 R2 and Windows 10. So we'll go back, we'll undo that change and rerun our tests, and we'll see that passes again successfully. while that's running. Any questions around unit testing? I'll say, I started looking at the Chef probably last summer sometime, and really struggled with kind of grasping how all it worked and really grokking, how it worked. And it was really until I found the Chef spec and the unit testing side of it, I really struggled a bit. Once I found that, the learning curve got much, much easier. I was able to use everything I knew about unit testing C# code and really utilize that for learning Chef. So if you're wanting to learn Chef, I absolutely suggest using unit tests and Chef spec to do that. So you can see here we're passing all of our tests again, and we're good to go. The next piece we want to look at is...
Any questions? Sorry.
Yeah, any questions?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, we do have a question in here.
I was just curious, what are the different applications that this can be used for?
For Chef specifically, or the unit testing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I get unit testing, but like what different applications have you used it for? Do you have any templates or?
Yeah, so there's all kinds of templates out there. The primary use that we have today at EBSCO is we utilize Team Foundation Server locally on-prem to manage all of our builds. That includes compilation builds and then also test builds for our C# code. And so to do that, we have to have test agents. And we have probably a dozen test agents or so. And we want all those test agents to be configured in exactly the same way, so that it doesn't matter which agent. There's a pool of agents, and whichever one's available will be used to run our test, right? And so we want all of those to be configured in the same way. And so in the past, we had a lot of trouble, because we're on a corporate domain. Via group policy, the operations folks will push down certain group policies for showing a warning when people log in that everything they're doing is being tracked or whatever, or what else? Disabling auto login on those kinds of things. And some of the tests that we do are UI automation tests. And so they depend on having a interactive session logged in and waiting and ready to run tests. So the group policy that was being pushed down was thwarting that, and our test agents would constantly be broken. And so we wrote a Chef Cookbook to change the registry to set all of the auto logon attributes correctly, to disable the logon warning. We can use it to install certain versions of Firefox if we're using that for UI automation, for example. And so now we can write that Chef Cookbook once, and we apply it to a dozen test agents, and we manage all of that infrastructure configuration centrally.
So you're using it to test group policies?
In some cases, yes, but not always. I mean, so the other use case that we have is for our web servers. And so on our web servers, we have a laundry list of Windows features that we need installed. And we need certain versions of .NET installed. What else? We want to, some of the stuff that we're doing in this cookbook, we want to create a log directory. We want to create a programs directory. And so in the same way, we've got about 16 to 20 web servers, well, really more than that. But we have web servers that we want the same configuration across all of those web servers. And so we write a cookbook, a Chef Cookbook, to manage that and be able to apply all of that across all of those nodes in the same way. Does that make sense?
There's sound out in here. I can't remember.
Very good, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm trying to figure out how to mute my other microphone. Real quick.
The echo definitely has gone away. It did come back for a minute, but I don't hear it now.
Okay.
I think we're good.
So when you execute the Chef Exec rspec, can you do it on more than a cookbook, or do you just have to CD into a cookbook and kind of run your Chef Exec rspec on a cookbook?
So the cookbook is all local. I'm showing you the local development experience, right? So I'm creating the chef cookbook, and then when I call this rspec command, it's going to look for any unit tests that are in the current folder or subfolders and run those. So right now I only have one unit test file, but if I wanted to have more, I could add more unit test files in this recipes folder under spec unit test. It would find all those and run all of those unit tests.
Hey, is that better? I changed I disabled one of the microphones.
Yeah, I think so. Sounds good to me.
Is that better, Oliver?
It sounds like it's working. I'm gonna monitor it though.
Okay, I disabled the extra microphone, which was on the speaker. So hopefully we're good to go now.
Cool. Any other questions?
Yes, sir. To your templates, you have like a template that maybe you want to test some group policy or test some setting across all the web servers in one environment, right? So we can just pull that template out and use it?
Well, so it's, let me pull up and show you some of the chef resources. So, you know, in each case, you know, depending on what group policies you want to test, there's going to be different things that you want to look at, and each one's going to be different. So I don't really have templates per se. You know, I do use the cookbooks that I've written to go back to and to remember how I did certain things. But these are all the different types of resources that you can leverage to test certain things. So if the group policy was setting certain registry settings, for example, I can use this Registry Key resource, and I can test whatever registry path and value that I'm curious about and validate that it's setting that appropriately.
That's useful.
Yeah.
Because then now you can go ahead and grab all your web servers across the whole environment and make sure the settings are all the same.
That's right. And the way that we manage our cookbooks is through that chef server that we talked about. And when we bootstrap a new server to apply a cookbook to that server, we actually set it up to run on a schedule. So every 30 minutes, I think, it validates that the server is still configured appropriately, right? So that's when we talked about configuration drift. That's what we're protecting. That's how we're protecting its drift. Is that over time, if someone were to go into that server and change the registry settings, the chef cookbook would run again in 30 minutes and find that problem and fix it automatically for us.
That is sweet.
So that's, we talked about the chef cookbook itself. We've talked about unit testing, but now let's talk about the integration testing side of things. So that's where Kitchen comes into play. We talked about Kitchen when we were talking about the chef workstation for developers. And so in this case, Kitchen is our testing framework for integration tests. There's several steps to that. The first is to create, which is where we provision a virtual machine or somewhere for us to run our integration tests. And there's different drivers that we can use to create those environments. The most common one, I think the default one when you download the Chef DK is Vagrant. And if you've heard about Vagrant and Vagrant boxes, it's a really, really cool tool where it has a registry of virtual machines, and it's a bunch of tooling around pulling that down and setting it up, making it very easy to create, edit, and share virtual machines with other developers. So Vagrant's a great tool. On Windows, it's using VirtualBox by default as part of Vagrant. Vagrant's another tool that you have to install, though. It is installed with Chef DK, though, as one of those embedded resources. But if you don't want to use Vagrant, for example, in my case, I'm on a Windows 10 laptop, and so I want to use Hyper-V. Hyper-V, there's a Hyper-V driver that you can use with Kitchen to provision virtual machines. And then there's a whole list of different drivers. There's an OpenStack, an Azure, an AWS, VMware, anything that can create virtual machines, there's probably going to be a driver for that. So whatever tooling or platform you're familiar with or want to use, you can probably use that with Kitchen. So we use that on the create step. The next step is the converge step. That's where we apply our cookbook to the virtual machine. Then we verify our integration tests against that virtual machine. And so there's different verifiers that you can use. Inspect is the one that comes with Chef out of the box. Because we're on Windows, we like PowerShell and Pester, so we're going to use the Pester verifier. But then again, there's a whole list of verifiers that you can use. Server spec is another Ruby framework for integration testing. And then finally, the final step is to destroy your testing, your kitchen environment. So we're going to run through these steps where we create a virtual machine, we apply our cookbook, and then we can run our our integration test rather against that. So let's look at that now.
If you want to use Pester, you just update kitchen.yaml, replace like inspect with Pester.
Yep, that's actually what we'll look at now. So this is our kitchen.yaml file, and this is where we configure how we want kitchen to run. And so we're going to see all the things that we just talked about, those different steps. So first we have the driver. So in this case, I'm using Hyper-V. And then I've got to give it information about where to pull the virtual machine from and different attributes for the virtual machine. So I tell it what virtual switch I want to use, where the VHD is located, what username and password I want to use, and then how much memory to give it. And then we provide a transport. The transport is how Kitchen talks to that virtual machine. In this case, I want to use WinRM, and again, I give it the username and passwords, and I tell it I want it to run with elevated privileges. The provisioner is almost always Chef Zero. I don't think I've ever used anything else besides Chef Zero, but that's just what's going to install Chef onto the node and then run our cookbook. Chef Zero is a local. You can use Chef Zero on your local machine. If you want to apply your cookbook to your local machine, you would use Chef Zero for that. And so it's just like it's a local chef run basically. I think there's probably some other provisioners. I've never used any. And then I'm using Pester as the verifier. And then under platforms is where I define the different platforms I want to test against. So here I want to run against Nano, Windows Server Nano Server. And so in that case, I can provide overrides to the configuration that I defined above. So in this case, I want to tell it I have a very special installer, a Chef client installer that I have to use here because Nano doesn't support MSIs. It only supports AppX, so I have to give it an AppX in that case. For Windows Server 2016, I want to give it a different virtual machine. And then again, for Windows Server 2008 R2, again, a different VHD. And then finally, I tell it what integration tests I want to run, what the run list is. So that's the cookbooks and the recipes and cookbooks that I want to run. In this case, I want to run this default recipe on my Acme WinWeb cookbook. And then I'm naming my suite Acme WinWeb default. So that's going to look into this test folder and find my Pester test here. So if you're familiar with Pester, this is just a standard Pester file where we describe the unit tests that we want to run. And so here we're defining integration tests for the resources that we created in our cookbook. So we want to test that the CData folder is created and that the CLogs folder is created. And for the file share, again, we have to be cognizant of what version of Windows we're on, but if it's less than Windows 10, we'll use this net share command to validate it. If it's Windows 10, we'll use the get SMB share commandlet. We can use all that. And that's it. So to run that, let's see, I'll just run kitchen list first. This will tell us all the kitchen environments or the kitchen platforms that have been created for us. It'll take just a second to enumerate those. So you can see I've got Nano, Server 2016, and Server 2008 R2. And the only one that's actually created is the Windows Server 2016 right now. You can run all of them at once. It just takes longer. And for demo purposes, we're only going to run one tonight. But to verify, to run the verify step, so you can see it's in a verified state right now. I've already run through all this. It takes some time to run through all those steps. But basically, I called Kitchen Create 2016 to create that Windows Server 2016 virtual machine. And then I called Kitchen Converge 2016 to apply to install Chef Client and then run my cookbook. And then finally, I can run Kitchen Verify 2016 to run my Pester integration tests against that virtual machine and validate that all of my assumptions are correct and that the cookbook is working correctly. So now it's copying over the Pester file to the virtual machine. And in a moment, we'll see that it runs each of those tests. Any questions while it's running?
Yeah, I have a question about the transport. Are there options besides WinRM? Like, can it use HTTP?
So the only other one that I've seen and used is SSH, which is primarily used for Linux. I've seen some people that have been able to get that to work on Windows as well, but there's really no need when you have WinRM. But those are the only two I've used ever. Those are the only two I've seen. So while that's loading, it's taking a little bit longer than expected. But oh, well, that's why my server is turned off. So let's not connect. I'm going to start it. So here, I'm not sure why it's turned off, but we're just going to turn that virtual machine back on. So what's probably happening here is Chef is saying, hey, or Kitchen is saying, hey, I can't contact the virtual machine right now because it was turned off. So hopefully that'll run and it'll find it and we'll keep going. Let's give that a minute.
Are you still getting echo?
No, sir.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So just to give you an idea of some of the timings on this, for the 2008 R2 platform, it takes about 3 minutes to create the virtual machine. So that's a 20 gig virtual machine image that Hyper-V is getting and creating in Hyper-V, and it takes about 3 minutes to do that. Then we run Converge the first time. It takes about 5 minutes. I think in that first step, it's installing the Chef client, and it's also installing PowerShell 5, which takes a little bit of time and it requires a reboot. So we have to call Converge again to finish up. So you can see it runs 2 resources here, and then it finishes up with another 2. And that's where it's creating the log directory and the data directory and the file share. That takes another minute. And then to run Verify, it takes around 40 seconds to run those tests. So soup to nuts, starting with nothing, it takes about 10 minutes to go through the entire process. But once you have it and it's created, from that point, you can add new configuration through the process, and it takes only about 60 to 90 seconds. Once you've created the virtual machine, if you've converged it fully the first time, if you want to add something new, it takes about 60 to 90 seconds in that case. That compared to Nano, which is much, much smaller, it's about a 600 meg virtual machine instead of a 20 gig virtual machine. It's about half the time. So it takes about 5 minutes to run through the full process and about 30 to 40 seconds for that feedback loop of adding new things from that point forward. So definitely, worth trying to use Server Core or Nano. They've just announced some changes to Windows Server Nano that it's primarily just going to be used for Docker containers now. So this probably isn't a valid use case anymore. I'm not sure. I haven't thought through that or tested it. So what's probably more likely is that we would use Server Core instead of Nano. All right, so let's go back. Looks like it timed out. Let's try it again. We'll just validate our virtual machine is running. Let's see if it finds it this time. All right, so it's trying to copy the files over. Any other questions at this point?
Yeah, I have one.
Sure.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I can hear the echo for sure. My question is around your continuous integration process. Do you actually stand up the VM with Chef and all that business, and then use TFS to apply your deltas, or do you use them both together? What does that process look like?
Yeah, so we haven't, our group hasn't built it into our CI process yet. There's other groups at EBSCO that have, and they were using a Jenkins process to do that, and they would, on the merge of a pull request, it would go through and do all of this. It would run all of the unit tests via Chef spec and rspec. It would then run through Kitchen and do all of that as well. So we have done that on some of our cookbooks. We leveraged some of their CI build at one point. We're not doing that anymore, but definitely something that we're looking to do going forward.
Okay, so then you usually for first infrastructure provisioning, is that right? And then after that, you use TFS for your CI on top of that provisioned asset. Is that the way you're doing it right now?
So are you specifically asking about the web servers that we're running these cookbooks against?
Yeah, like in the case of what you and I both do, which is we deliver developer developed apps to infrastructure. I'm just curious how your process worked. That's really what I was looking for.
Sure. So because we're an internal business systems group, we have multi-tenant shared servers, and they're long-lived. These are pets, right? They're not cattle. And that's primarily because we're a very low-margin business, and so we're very cognizant of cost. And we've just never had a great way to fully utilize our hardware other than just using it in a multi-tenant scenario. So most of our web servers, they are provisioned manually, and then they stick around for a long time. And so that's really where Chef is great, is because those long-lived servers, we can manage the So we're probably not going to have enough time, but we'll try. So it's failing on this. So we'll try to recreate it. It may take some time, but depending how much time we have, we may have time to see it all. So while that's going, so we have to build that multi-tenant server. Looking forward, we are hoping to leverage containers to replace that, because we can still get a very high density on our hardware using containers, but we can still deploy things independently as well. So, in that scenario, Chef is probably less useful, because then you're using other tools like Docker Compose to set up those environments, and then you're really treating your containers more as cattle instead of pets. So it's different ways of doing things. Chef is really useful in this scenario. I still see Chef being super useful for the test agent scenario that we talked about before, because those test agents just live for a while. We might replace those with Docker 2 at some point, but Chef is really, to me at least, is really valuable work for longer lived infrastructure.
Okay, you answered my question.
Good.
Appreciate it.
I have a question. What kind of rights does the Chef client need on individual systems? And can it use third hop credentials or Cred SSD or anything like that for remote authentication?
Great question. So when you bootstrap the server, you give it a set of credentials to utilize. And that is... that's just for the bootstrapping process, but in that process, it's actually installing Chef on the target node. So there is an agent that's running there, and it's got a scheduled component. I think it's just using scheduled tasks within Windows to rerun on some interval. 30 minutes, I think, is the default. And so when the Chef client runs on that node, if you bootstrap it against the Chef server, it's going to call out to the Chef server to pull down any dependencies that it needs, and all that goes over HTTP And then it also logs the chef run itself so that you can see an audit trail of what happened, what was successful, what wasn't, etc. So from a live or production deployment scenario, you bootstrap those nodes with admin credentials to initially install the chef client. And from that point forward, the chef client is just running locally on that node and publishing results out to the chef server. Does that make sense?
Push from the chef server, and it's all HTTP, not HTTPS.
I believe that's configurable. Honestly, I don't know what we're doing on our side. Ours is all on-prem internal network, so we're just not too worried about it.
What virtualization platform are you using? Hyper-V?
We're actually using VMware on our data center in Birmingham.
And are you using the chef client to connect to the APIs in VMware to spin up VMs?
No, because like I said, all our VMs are all long-lived. So we provision we initially provision the VM manually, and then we strap it with Chef to manage the configuration from that point forward.
So I want to talk about the drift reporting. The same context that we were just talking about. So basically, I want to be able to get.
I'm sorry, I had to mute you there. For some weird reason, your voice is causing a lot of echoing. I am going to troubleshoot that in a second.
What is it you want to do?
Drift reporting. Want to know about that?
Can you understand? Are we still live?
I can hear you now. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question's around drift reporting and what capabilities there are as far as what Chef can do for drift reporting.
So every time the Chef client runs on a node, it reports up, what it found. And so if I had, a dozen resources inside of my recipe that it was, checking against, when it found something that didn't comply, it would log that and then attempt to fix it. And so I don't have access to a Chef server easily right now. But when you look at it, you can there's a run history, and you can see every node that Chef client ran on and what resources were reapplied. So I don't know if I've got a good example of the logs here. But when the Chef client runs, it tells you how many resources were applied. And so generally what you would expect, once you have a good Chef client run, you would expect that wouldn't run again, those resources, unless you had some kind of drift. And so when you see, if it's running every 30 minutes, after that initial good Chef run, anytime after that where a resource was reapplied, that's an indication that someone went in or something went in and changed that configuration out of compliance with your Chef cookbook.
How does it connect? Is it a file share or HTTP or?
The Chef server?
Yes. How does it connect to all the servers?
The Chef server is a web server, and the Chef clients running on the individual nodes call out to the Chef server.
When are 85 minutes.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it calls out, and then does it put all the files on the Chef server then? Right, it just calls out and then sticks them all on the.
Yeah, so the web server node, for example, will run the Chef client locally, and because it's bootstrapped against a Chef server, it will ask the Chef server for any updated dependencies, like new cookbook versions, for example. It'll pull those from the Chef server to the web server to use in the Chef client run, and then it'll post back up to the web server the log and the results from that Chef run.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So it looks like we're having some trouble here. It's not able to connect. I used to have the Nano one running pretty reliably, but that AppX that we looked at, it's out of date now, and it caused an error because the certificate is out of date.
Bitten by the demo god, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we've all been bitten by that thing.
Hey, Rob, I really, I found what you have on your website very, very useful, especially the talk that you have, or that you wrote up about the client that you talked about, which is the continuous deployment of the test client to do, oh gosh, whatever the technology that Microsoft uses for doing the browser testing.
Oh, Selenium or Coded UI?
No, Coded UI.
Yeah.
Using Coded UI. That really helped me out quite a bit. So I was able
Good.
to actually take your stuff that you had and put it to use. So
That's great.
thanks.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it's there for. Most of the stuff I blog is just stuff that we ended up doing at work, and I figure, you know, if we've had that problem, surely somebody else has as well.
So I don't know if any of you have used Coded UI, but it can be fragile. To get it to run, man, it takes some work.
They didn't build an anti-fragile.
I mean, you apply too much to it and it'll, you know, shatter, so to speak.
Yeah, we're actually trying to convert all of our Coded UI to Selenium now. We still use MS Test to execute the unit tests or the tests themselves, but we're actually using Selenium for all the UI automation instead of Coded UI. If y'all are familiar with Donovan Brown, the Microsoft guy that's been talking about DevOps for the last year or two, he basically, I don't know if he said it on a recording or not, or maybe I just talked to him at a conference, but he had said that they're just not investing in it anymore. And he personally suggested just use Selenium because Microsoft doesn't seem to be supporting it any longer.
Oh, that's interesting.
Well, I say that they're supporting it. If you have a problem, like I've talked to the PM for that product, but they're not building any new features into it. And I think over time, they'll probably just let Selenium take over that market.
Yeah, the other interesting thing is they don't have anything to compete with SOAP UI either, which I find interesting.
Yeah, actually, we use SOAP UI as well, and a lot of the developers that use it are very complimentary of it. From my perspective, I would expect that you would create. You don't have a UI, which I think is really why they like SOAP UI. But you should be able to do all that same testing from code as well. And so it's really just, it becomes integration tests via in-unit or MS test. You don't get the UI, which is kind of sucks, but at the end of the day, you can still do all the same stuff. Well, it looks like it's not going to behave.
It's a lot more than that. It's a lot more than that. It does code management, workflow and release, and kind of like working the PM to the developer to storyboard everything that's going on so that you can actually get something put together and release it and find out who's doing it, when they did it, what the intent is from the business, everything from requirements all the way through to pushing it to a production system.
But once it's pushed, that's kind of the end of it. It doesn't do any desired state configuration.
At this point, no, you could actually roll in the desired state into what they call tasks inside of TFS, which would allow you to run anything from this Ruby code that he's mentioning to pretty much PowerShell code, shell scripting, whatever it is you want, whatever you can get an agent to do for you. Because you can run an agent now on Linux and Windows.
So in a company like ours, if we are very TFS driven, what would the benefit of using Chef be?
I think the things that Rob spoke to, which was it's much more mature than the TFS product would be. And so there's a lot more things that you could test with it and that you could do that it would take you a lot more effort to take care of and do with TFS.
So what's the question, Chef versus what?
TFS. Yeah, versus all the different tooling that you have in TFS 2017 and DSTS in the cloud type stuff, right?
Okay.
Compared to Chef.
Yeah, so I mean, the new build and release system in TFS and VSTS is really more of an orchestration tool. It can run whatever you tell it to. Where Chef is more specifically about infrastructure configuration. It's more analogous to PowerShell DSC. And the reason you would use it over PowerShell DSC is just because it's been around longer and it has more enterprise features.
Does that help answer your question better? Thanks, Rob. That was a much better explanation.
Good, good.
It's drip recording.
And Rob, did you mention what the server, the Chef server runs on?
It's just a web server. I forget what technology. I think it's a Rails based web server.
So is there now a Windows version of the Chef server software? Because last I heard it was only Linux.
No, I think it's still on Linux. I'm not sure on that, but if I had to guess, that's probably the case.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't looked at the latest versions of stuff, so I wasn't completely sure.
Rob, could you possibly use
that block that you got in there that's blocked? Is that quite a bit?
Say again?
Is the block, there you go.
Oh, look at that.
The screen highlighted in the prompt.
Yep. Okay. So let's see. So we've got that created. Let's see if I can kitchen converge. So I don't know how much more time that we have. That'll probably take around 7 minutes. Do we think we have about 10 or so more minutes to go through that, or do we need to cut it off?
Well, we have this room booked until 8. And so really, Rob, it's up to you. I mean, what is it, your time? What is it, 9 o'clock your time?
I'm good. I can keep going if it's okay with y'all.
Okay. So I'll leave it up to the folks that are here. If there's more questions, please feel free to.
Yeah, I have one question. If for when you have open the editor code, you have all the excuse me, all the directory structure laid out, pretty much with everything. If you were to create one from the scratch, would you have to maintain this directory structure, or is there a chef commandlet that would actually create this directory structure and give you a sample template Ruby file?
Yep. So 90% of what I have there is all just based off of the template. Let's see if I can. Let's see if I can remember the command. So knife is, and actually I may not need the chef command. Knife is the command that you can use to integrate with the chef server. And so it's probably going to give me an error about it can't find the chef server. But I think this is the command that you would use, and if it works, it may just be slow. But I think it'll say it can't find the chef server, but it's going to create the cookbook anyway.
Oliver, there we go. Now we're ready.
It's chef generate cookbook, and then the cookbook name.
Is that the new command? Because they changed it at one point. Do you know?
Yeah, it's the new one.
Okay. You know what's funny is it's probably been 4 or 5 months since I've created a new cookbook. I keep just working on the ones that I have, you know.
Okay. Did that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Anybody else?
I got another question.
Okay.
Can you go back to the Visual Studio Code?
Sure. So just for that last question, you can see now it's created this directory structure, and it gives me the kitchen file and the Powershell file, the metadata file, and recipes. So it gives you that basic structure that you need. All right, so here's code.
It might be under default recipe.
Okay.
So line 24, 25, and 26. What is set script, get script, and test script? Is that something built in for DSC, or is that a Ruby or a Chef thing?
Yeah. So that's a DSC thing. So every DSC resource has those same commands defined. Get script is just a description of what the resource is. Test script is where it checks to see if it needs to apply the set script. And then the set script is where it actually applies whatever that configuration is.
Have you written the DSC? Have you written anything DSC or looked at it yet? That's the 3 requirements for DSC.
Right.
You have to test, to get, and to set.
Not using Chef, I think. Ad hoc, like in Windows, but never done it. So. Thank you.
Yeah, so you see this resource type is set to script, where this one down here is file. This is a file DSC resource. The script is like an ad hoc DSC resource where you're giving it the 3 scripts, and it's basically creating and running a DSC script on the fly. And really all this is it's a way to run PowerShell scripts in a way that can be idempotent, meaning it'll only run it if it needs to, and it can reapply it multiple times if needed. All right, so let's see where we are. It looks like it's still installing the Chef client on our virtual machine. So let's go back and let's talk about the test-driven side of things. So we've looked at the different unit testing, integration testing, the Chef Cookbook, all that jazz. Let's say I want to add some new integration. So technically, we haven't seen the verify step run yet, but we'll get there in a minute. But let's say we want to add some new configuration to create a registry setting, for example. Instead of writing that inside of the cookbook here first, we would first create the tests around it to validate that we have good tests. So for example, we would create an integration test that says, we expect that this key would be created and that it should be set to 0. So that's our integration test. And we could run that to show that it's currently breaking. We can't quite yet, so let's just hold off for a second. But that would be our integration test. And in the same way, we would go into our unit test file and create our unit test to show that all the unit tests are set up appropriately, or that those assumptions are met. So here we saw earlier that we had all of our unit tests were passing. I think there were 10 unit tests that were running. But now I've got these 2 new unit tests, and I've got one for creating a registry key using the Registry Key Chef resource, and then I have the same exact one using the DSC registry DSC resource. And so I think I have to change this. I think this is a bug. I will change these to strings. So now I have these 2 string registry keys. One, it's the same registry key. I'm just doing it 2 different ways. One with the Chef Cookbook resource and one with the DSC resource. I could comment either one of these 2 and I'd end up with the exact same thing. But for demonstration purposes, I'll do both. So I've saved that. Now let's go to my folder here. And we'll run our unit tests. So in this case, I haven't made the change to the cookbook yet. So but I have added these unit tests. So my expectation is that in running these, it should fail because we haven't applied those changes to the cookbook yet. And so this, if you're familiar with test-driven development, that's a whole concept around test-driven development is you write the test first, you show the tests fail, then you go implement the code, and then run the tests again to show that the tests pass. And they call that the red-green workflow, where by seeing that it's red, we know that the test is validating something that was failing and then is passing once the code is there. So again, it did what we expected. It's failing on the create registry key. It's doing. We see 4 errors because it's running it on 2 versions of Windows, but we have 2 unit tests that are failing on 2 versions of Windows. So if our converge has completed, and it looks like it did, all right. So let's catch up real quick. So I want to run kitchen verify 2016. So this is just to show that our integration tests, without any changes, are all running successfully. So again, this is going back, and we'll just look here real quick. This is my Pester test, and so we're looking at making sure that the data folder and the logs folder are created, and if it's not Windows 10, that the file share is created. In this case, we're running it against 2016, and that one is version 10 of Windows. So I've got this other commented out again because it requires an internet connection, and I didn't want to fool with that. So really, it's just these top 2 Pester tests that we're going to see. All right, so it's transferring the files over to the node. So it's our Pester file. While that finishes, let's come back over here. So when we're ready to apply these changes to our Chef Cookbook, that's our test. So let's look at our Chef Cookbook. We can scroll down to the bottom, and we've got a couple of resources here. All right, so this is where we use the Chef resource to create the registry key. We set the path, set the name. We are going to use a string type, and we set the value to 0. So this is equivalent to this. This one's using the DSC resource, the registry DSC resource. Again, we're setting the path, setting the type, the name, and the value. So one of the questions I often get is, well, how do I know which one to use? You know, which one is do you always use DSC if you can, or what's your rule of thumb there? And for me, it's whatever is the easiest, right? It's more of a pragmatic approach. In this case, it's fewer lines to use the Chef resource. So I would probably just use this. But let's see. In one of the examples, like in the get or the create the file share example, it's up here. So let me uncomment that. So in this case, although this is fewer lines of code, this is far harder to read, right? Because we've got PowerShell script just in line. It's very hard to read. You don't get IntelliSense or code coloring, any of that. In this case, I would use this one because it's much easier to read, and I'm using that DSC resource out of the box. So it's really just more of a pragmatic approach of whatever makes the most sense in the situation. In this case, I'm going to leave both of these, and what will happen is when the Chef Cookbook runs, this one will apply first, and then this one, it'll check to see if it already exists, and it will, and then it won't have to run this one. Okay.
So to run the DSC resource, you need to have PowerShell 5 something and above, correct?
Four and above.
4 and above.
That's
The
correct.
best one is 5.
So if you don't have PowerShell 4 and above installed, you have to use.
Yeah, it's actually better to go with 5 if you can.
Yeah, and that's why I install PowerShell 5 at the top of my cookbook.
I don't know what version of PowerShell comes with, like Server 2012, I think it's 3.
Yeah, but I should be in our location. It should be all 5 now.
So, but on new servers, it's not, because we don't upgrade it unless you're doing it.
Well, I worked it through Lumention. Lumention should be doing it.
Okay.
All right, so it looks like our integration test finally passed and completed. It took it about 1.5 minutes. That's odd. It usually doesn't take that long. I don't know if I have a virus scanner running or something. I don't know. Anyway, it ran the 2 Pester tests that we expected. 2 passed, 0 failed, right? And so now we're going to go back and add the integration tests that we wanted to add earlier. Now that we've seen everything pass, now we want to add our new integration test to validate that this registry exists, and then we're going to rerun the verify step. So again, we haven't actually saved our cookbook with those changes yet, and we haven't applied that cookbook to this virtual machine. So the expectation is that we'll see that the new Pester test will run, but it will fail because that hasn't been applied yet. So again, we've already shown up here, it was the other window. We've already shown here that our unit tests fail. And here we're going to expect to see that our integration tests fail. And by seeing that they fail, we know that it's a good test. If it never failed, we wouldn't know if it's a good test or not. I'm not sure how long this is going to run. Hopefully not the 1.5 minutes.
Has this been a useful session for you guys?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Even though we didn't cover a whole lot of PowerShell, it just kind of shows you the way to plug them together, if you will.
Yeah, so one thing I will mention, and some people have asked this before, this whole kitchen process, these steps that we're going through, I've seen several folks starting to use this with PowerShell scripts. So it's not specific to Chef. Because, I mean, if you think about it, it's just creating a virtual machine, running some code on it, and then running some tests against it. So I'm starting to see some folks use this kitchen tool to validate their PowerShell scripts with Pester in a continuous way, right? So even if you decide Chef's not your thing, you don't want to dive into that, but you do use PowerShell and Pester, I would absolutely suggest that you look into Kitchen and look for some folks that are using PowerShell or using Kitchen to test PowerShell. Okay, so here's our integration test, and we can see that this one failed. It expected the value for that registry to be set to 0, and it was nothing because it couldn't find the registry key. All right, so now we've shown the integration test failed here. The unit test failed. So now let's go and apply the changes to our Chef Cookbook. Let's go back to our default file. We're going to save it now. And I'll go back and we'll rerun our unit tests. And so now that we've added that configuration to our resource, we would expect these unit tests to now pass. Let's see, last time it took about 20 seconds. waiting on that, I'll finish out the slides real quick. So we already talked about Pester. We've talked about Kitchen. Just some information. If you want to see any of this code, or I believe I have the slides out there too. You go to bit.ly/tdd chef, and that's just a bit.ly link to my chef repo that has all this code. These are all the different versions of everything that I'm using, which matters. So that was one of the big changes, going from Visual Studio and .NET and Windows to the Chef stuff. All of these versions matter, and Chef DK is always changing versions. You've got to make sure that what you have works well with all the pieces. So definitely make sure you have that. I'll show real quick. You can see Chef exec. If you're familiar with Ruby, you can see all of the Ruby gems that you have. That's their way of sharing libraries inside of Ruby. And you can see all of the versions of those that you have via this gem list command. So those are all of the ones I have. And I think if I put Kitchen in here, it'll filter it down to just the gems that are related to Kitchen. So you want to look at that. Sometimes it's worth updating, but you've got to be careful when you do that. It might break things too. So, but you can always roll them back. So in this case, I've got Kitchen Hyper-V, which is the driver for the Kitchen driver for Hyper-V. I've got the Kitchen Pester verifier, and then there's other ones here, but you can see all the versions of those. So definitely take a look at that. Just some general, actually, let's do this. So the unit tests are now all passing. I've got 14 passing unit tests. And so now now we know that I had a good unit test, and we've applied those changes to the cookbook, and now our test pass. So now I've got to run reconverge on the environment to apply those new changes to create that registry setting on the virtual machine. So while that's running, we'll come back here. Just some general troubleshooting points for Chef on Windows. If for whatever reason the converge is failing and you're not exactly sure why, if you need more details, you can use the -L debug flag to get debug output for that. You can look at your gem versions. Sometimes you need to validate that. I've had scenarios where a colleague and I were both working on a cookbook, and it would work for me, but not for the other developer. And it ended up being different versions of gems, and so we just had to work through that. So check that. Cookbooks are always changing. So when the Windows resource was recently, it was released back in March. I was in the midst of getting this talk together and this demo together for PowerShell Summit, and they changed the Windows resource out from underneath me. And by default, I had it configured to go pull the latest cookbooks. And so when version 3 was released, I automatically pulled it down, and it broke all my stuff, and I wasn't sure why for a while. So definitely make sure that you have the versions that you're expecting. One of the things that you can do, I'm not sure if I still have it in here or not, but at one point I had specified, you can specify a given version, and I can't remember if I did that in the metadata file, the Burks file, but you can say, I want a specific version of a cookbook, which is one way to do it. This Burks file locks in the versions that it pulls on the initial run. If you want to get the latest, you can delete that Burks file, and it'll go get the newest versions out there. So just be cognizant of that being there. And if you start to see some weird issues, you might want to check on that. So just like we saw today, I couldn't get the verify to work. I'm not sure why, but destroying it and recreating the VM worked. I think in most cases that has to do with the network setup. I initially ran that virtual machine from work earlier today. Now I'm at home on a different network. Sometimes it just gets hinky. So the easiest way to fix that is to destroy and recreate it. Whoops. And then if you specifically need help with Chef on Windows, Feel free to reach out to me. I would love to help you, but two of the guys that helped me out in the community were Matt Rock and Stephen Moravsky. Back in the fall when I was learning all this stuff, both these guys worked for Chef. Steve just went and accepted a position at Microsoft, so he's working. He's a blue badge now, but still very active in the Chef community. I just submitted a pull request to one of the kitchen gyms today, and he was on the PR comment. So still very active. Both these guys can help. They've got a Slack group, chefcommunity.slack.com. There's an IRC channel, various ways to get help there. And then both these guys are on Twitter. I'm on Twitter if you need any help there. All right, so we're close. Oh, great. I didn't converge because I spelled it wrong. So spell your commands right. That's important.
Well, we tried to tell you that earlier. But,
oh, did you? I'm sorry. I kept talking. I probably didn't give you a chance. I apologize.
Can you do the -L to find out why?
No, I didn't. So this should run pretty quick because I've already done all of the other Converge steps. It's already installed the Chef client. It's already run all of the other DSC resources. Those have all been applied, so it's really only going to have to run those last two. So this should go pretty quick. So we're now in that development cycle where it's really only 60 to 90 seconds to roll through creating the tests, seeing the test fail, adding the new configuration code to the resource, and then reconverging that. So hopefully this goes pretty quick. And then once we see that the converge passes and that our new resource has been applied, you can see here it looked at the log folder and it said that was already up to date. And now it's looking at the data folder. That should be up to date as well. And then it'll get to our registry key. So this is where it's adding our new registry key. It's using the Chef resource first. And now you can see that 1 of 5 resources was applied. That was one of our new ones. And then finally, we can run kitchen verify 2016. And it'll go and run our new integration test against the virtual machine. And we should see that those are all passing. Assuming it does, that's the full test-driven development cycle of writing our integration test, showing that fails, writing our unit test, showing that fails, creating the new configuration code in our Chef recipe, applying, adding it to the recipe, rerunning the unit test to show that those now pass, and then converging the new cookbook against the virtual machine, and then rerunning the integration tests to show that they pass. And there we go. 3 passed, 0 failed, should have registry key set, succeeded. All right, so that concludes the demo. I apologize for all the back and forth and having to go through it, but you actually got to see a little bit more of actually going through the full create converge process. It just took a little bit of extra time. So with that, any other questions that we can cover?
No, I think that's about it for tonight, Rob. Really, really appreciate it, man. Thanks a lot for spending your time out of your day to come give us this particular demonstration.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Thanks for the invite.
You bet. Maybe we can have you back again some other time. And if you're in Phoenix, let us know. Maybe we can have you here in person.
Yeah, that would be great. I would love that.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Oliver.
All right. Broadcast stopping. Wait. No? Come on, guys. Where's your manners?
All right, we'll catch you next time, Rob. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you. See you later.